Hi, farmers. I'm Gary from Farmers Weekly, and we're chatting to Wandile Sihlobo, who is the agricultural economist for Agbiz, as well as the presidential envoy for the Department of Agriculture. Am I correct?
That's correct, Gary, and thanks for having me on, man. Early in the morning, nicely fresh.
Absolutely. Last day of NAMPO.
Yes.
And I find it very interesting that there are so many variables at NAMPO happening at the same time, but somehow everything seems to happen exactly like it should, and it's made to be. I don't know if you've experienced the same at NAMPO.
I mean, it's been excellent because we've been coming here for a long time, but it's always a great space to gauge also the sentiment.
Yes.
It's not enough to only look at the data.
Yes.
You talk to folks, but you come to places like Nampo to get a feel and see of what the mood looks like.
A more tactile experience.
Absolutely. And also just seeing the new technologies that folks are bringing in,
Yes.
which is always important because, I mean, our farming sector is where it's at because of the technological advancements that we have made. So
Yes.
walking at Nampo, you sort of see the engine of the South African agricultural sector.
And how big it is.
Absolutely.
I think there's often the perception that agriculture is, the small little sector, one side, and it really isn't.
I mean, it isn't, Gary, because even if you're thinking about the numbers now, we tend to follow what Statistics South Africa says, where we say the South African agricultural sector is about 2.5 of the GDP.
Yes.
But the minute you look forward and backward out of linkages, and there's good work done by our friends at BFAP, the Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy, which begins to tell us that actually the value of the South African farming sector in the economy, it's around between 10 to 14%.
Yes.
And when you think about it, even in a share of employment, as well as a share of the exports, it's around 8%. We are now, in fact, few touches below 1 million people that are in the farming sector. I was just looking at the numbers
Yes.
before coming to Nampo. And they were showing that for the first quarter of this year, we saw employment nudging up by 3%. We have about 960,000 people. And you think about the value chain, you have about 350,000 people. So give or take, you have about 1.3 million South Africans or people in South Africa working in agriculture in this value chain.
And is that just direct agriculture, or is that subsidiaries included as well?
No, that's direct agriculture, the 960,000 people.
Yes.
Then those that are in the value chain is at 350,000.
Okay.
But then in terms of the exports, you also see that agriculture actually makes up somewhere between 7 and 8% of the export revenue. Last year, that was at a record 15.1 billion US dollars. So that's to tell you then that there's a lot of value that we get in exports, a lot of value in employment,
Yes.
but also just revitalizing the rural towns. Because everyone, when they drive to Nampo, without these agribusinesses and the farming businesses,
Yes.
a number of these rural towns wouldn't exist. So that, again, is a value that agriculture is not providing only food security,
Yes.
but rather the livelihood and sustains many of the communities in our country.
Yes, that's wonderful. So now let me ask you the question.
Yeah.
As presidential envoy, what is a presidential envoy, and what is the role?
I mean, look, the key thing here is that the president of the Republic of South Africa views agriculture as one of the important sectors.
Yes.
Both
And that's
on-
wonderful to hear. I think that's exactly what everyone wants to hear.
Absolutely, and both on its possibility about how it can uplift
Yes.
the various communities in South Africa, but he also recognizes that there's an untapped potential that is in here. So in recognizing that, and also he views land reform as very important, both on making sure that it can achieve its two broad objectives, because we tend to think about land reform and be drawn into certain corners, but to actually have a successful land reform, you have to have achieved two things, which is restorative justice and economic growth.
Yes.
If you are achieving restorative justice without achieving economic growth, you are not succeeding.
Pointless.
So looking at both of those things, the idea then was to say agriculture also needs to continue to export more. We are now exporting about half of what we produce, the 15.1 billion US dollars that I was talking about. Then in the president's mind was saying, okay, we need then someone to come in and make sure that the coordination of the agriculture, the land, the trade, and other ministries that are involved here, at least in the private office of the president. There's someone that gets to be responsible for that. This is where then the envoy sits on, their coordination and interacting with all of these ministers, but not only there, but being the person also that interacts a lot with the private sector and many communities and many others that wants to be involved in it. Like you can almost think of it as a one-stop shop where most of these things gets to come in, and then we get to be able to try to assist to the best as we can, but working in that with the ministers and the departments. But the other beautiful thing about the envoy is that you're not only interacting with the minister, interacting with the DG, you also are able to go to the grassroots of the data, what's going on.
Yes.
And the core thing is to try to cut red tape and make sure that what the private sector needs to be done in order to continue with their work is done. Where the objectives of the president on growing the sector needs to happen, it happens. And the objective of the president are clear, by the way, on what he wants out of the sector. What he hopes to get is that over the next 3 to 5 years, he wants to see the gross value, the size of the South African farming economy expanding by 30%.
By 30%.
30%, 30. The president also wants to see the employment in the agricultural sector increasing by anywhere between 300,000 to 500,000.
Yes.
And he doesn't think that this is only going to happen to the land that we are having, which is why he's a presidential envoy on agriculture on land.
Yes.
Because on a land aspect, we have a lot of land that is currently underutilized, that we are working now to ensure that how does it come to utilization with title deeds expanded to black farmers.
Yes.
We have a concept that I've even written about, which is better few, but better black farmers, better commercial black farmers, because you don't want only white farmers to be dominant in a commercial space. You want black farmers also to move into that. How do we begin to do that? Then there, Gary, what we are doing is, between the period 2006 all the way to today, the South African government has gone out to the market, bought land at market price, not expropriated, and not undercutting the sellers. If anything, some land prices have actually increased when the government came into the market to buy the land. They spent roughly between 12 to 15 billion rands buying that land. That's the valuation of it.
Yes.
It's now sitting on what we call the agricultural land holding account
Yes.
in the Department of Land Reform and Rural Development under the arm of land redistribution. Our land reform has 3 legs: restitution, redistribution, and tenure. Then now we want to begin deploying that land to appropriately selecting beneficiaries.
Yes.
That process...
And I think that's been a challenge at this point in time.
That's been a challenge, but this is why we are doing this now. Because remember, this is not something that started today. This is something that has been coming from far back as 2006. The president recognizes then that this is something that needs to be tackled. In his speech in 2021, he made a point that we are going to establish a land reform agency, which exactly signals to this.
Yes.
But there are processes that gets to be followed. These things don't happen overnight, but the core thing is that that land will be released with title deeds to appropriately selected beneficiaries geared towards commercial production. As we begin to achieve that,
Yes.
we will then get those jobs, and commodity associations will be involved in unlocking that.
Yes.
I'm narrating all of this bigger story to say the centrality then of the envoy is the coordination of all of this process with the blessings of the president, but also continuously setting and assisting in setting the vision, aligning and monitoring and intervening whenever there are some areas that need a bit of intervention so that we see things. And remember, this is also not about the president only or about the envoy who is an assistant or to the president, but rather the sector, to say, can we get the sector to do well? Can we ensure that the South African farmers are able to operate well and achieve what they can? Can we unlock what blocks them? That's the core thing in here.
And there are so many challenges around that. But let me ask you, so with your economic hat on then, what are the current challenges that we are facing in the agricultural community when it comes to input costs, and export and the export challenges that we face, and especially the fuel prices that are currently, I think, terrifying everyone is probably the best word.
Yeah. Gary, so I mentioned earlier that the role of the envoy is not just limited, because I could see when the president had announced this, there was a misunderstanding as to say, oh, as a Department of Agriculture, what is happening there. No. It involves this coordination, which
Yes.
includes trade. And the reason trade is important, and I'm coming back to fuel and the challenges,
Yes.
is because we are now exporting about half of what we produce.
Yes. You
If
said,
we
yes.
bring then the 2.5 million hectares of land into production, we have to have new markets for that.
Yes.
Even with what we have, if all of the machinery and the technology that is happening outside is adopted, and then we begin to see improvements in our productivity, we have to have markets to take that to.
Yes.
And I think then the issue of export diversification is at the center of that. There are gains being made with China, like this China-Africa Economic Partnership Agreement, but that is still just a stop thing of opening the markets for now, but we
Yes.
need a more ambitious trade agreement
Absolutely.
with them. India is one of the countries we're looking at, and then the entire BRICS. But in times of peace, even the Middle East, because
Yes.
the Middle East is a big market. Each of those countries are importing over 10 billion US dollars of agricultural products a year. Saudi Arabia, about 20 billion US dollars of agricultural products a year. So
Yes.
we want to get in those markets. So that's the first part, is the exports, opening up those. As then the exports are being opened, this takes me to the second part of to where are the problems?
Yes.
The ports. I mean, the folks in the Western Cape, if you talk to SATI, the Table Grape Association, they will tell you that they had excellent table grape. And in fact, if you travel across the Northern Cape and you were talking to people in various towns there, you would realize, I was in Kakamas towards the end of the year and I was talking to farmers in table grapes. The crop was excellent, but when they had to export this at the end of the year, Port of Cape Town gave massive problems. So improving efficiencies at the ports along with opening markets is a second part, because the ports are an issue.
Yes.
And the ports, unlike electricity, you can't really do your own port. They have to work.
Yes.
Then you have the issues then that are related to biosecurity in general, plant health and animal health. A lot of work is happening about foot and mouth disease,
Yes.
and a lot of efforts there, but plant health is another part. And the other thing I would add is that we are a country that has thrived. We have an agricultural sector that has more than doubled since 1994. It's grown over the years. But the engine behind that, to repeat the point I made, is technology. But now technology needs to come to South Africa being open to be the leader in adopting better seed cultivars.
Yes.
Because that's what gives us these better outputs across. So the registrar's office at the Department of Agriculture is someone we work with to say, hey, you need to be faster on making sure you put the country on the forefront of this. We can't afford to be late. We're almost late on some of the new genetic techniques on seeds.
Yes.
We're dragging our feet. That's another area.
Yes.
Then, of course, the contemporary problems that are related to geopolitics, higher input costs, higher fertilizer costs, and that is painful.
Yes.
Because we're sitting
Extremely painful.
we are sitting in Free State here, and there's a lot of grain farmers and the oilseeds farmers. About half of their input cost is fuel and fertilizer.
Yes.
They spend 35% of the input cost is fertilizer, 15% of the input cost is fuel. So that's, with all of these increases, is one of the things. The challenge with South Africa is that we import 80% of the fertilizer, all of our fuel, 98% of the agrochemicals. So we do have this exposure.
Yes.
So there is something there that we need to look at, and it will constrain farmers, especially in the season that we are heading to, the 2026-27,
Yes.
where there's a possibility of an El Nino drought. There's a higher input cost. The commodity prices are under pressure. So as much as we are optimistic about agricultural sector, we have to be realistic about the painful points that the farmers are experiencing in grains, in livestock, and all of these things. These are risks that are there, but I would say this, Gary, these are well understood, and we are always consistently thinking about how do we assist in these, both on the side where I assist at the president, but also most importantly in my work at AgBiz, the various agribusinesses that
Yes.
always come into the party to
Yes.
assist the sector.
For sure. Because I think the biggest concern that everyone has is, at what point is it uneconomical for a farmer to proceed or to continue farming? You know, where it's probably going to be cheaper than harvesting just to repay their debts and call it a day.
Gary, we are praying and hoping we don't get to the stage where
Yes.
that gets to be an issue. But the reality is this is a global problem.
Yes.
It's not unique to South Africa. The Strait of Hormuz, which is where the problem arises at, about 35% of urea transit there In the US, the farmers are experiencing higher input costs, but of course, they have subsidies and all of these things which we don't have in South Africa. And we can't have subsidies in South Africa. There's an economic conversation about the distortion they introduce to the system.
Yes.
And it's easier as an economist, of course, to be talking about those things because you're not the one paying, you are sitting behind your desk. But there's also a reality, the fact that there are fiscal constraints in this country. There's just no money.
Yes.
But the core thing then is to say, if the farmers are already experiencing so much rising input costs,
Yes.
can you then, local government and national government, do your part so that they don't get to deal with your other inefficiencies that also increases the transaction cost?
Yes.
Then the core starting point should be to say what's within our control as South Africans. The local municipalities, the provincial governments, the national governments, can they do their part appropriately so that we don't add the cost burden and the headache?
Yes.
And that's the work that we really have to be beginning to work on it, and which I think the ministers that are responsible, the departments, are beginning to appreciate that work a lot.
Yes.
So it's really in the midst of all of that. But this is a long journey. In isiXhosa, we
It
say,
really is.
in isiXhosa, we say, indlela, which means it's a long journey, but we have to continue walking
Just
through
have to
it.
keep pushing.
Yeah.
And I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your efforts. I think the sentiment that we often experience from our audiences are, one of frustration that not enough is being done. And I think that by communicating these challenges regularly, like you're doing, I think would at least, if it doesn't alleviate the challenge, it at least creates a better understanding of what is being done to better improve the agricultural sector. And I thank you for that.
Thank you so very much.
Great. And thank you for taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you, Gary.
And farmers, until next time, goodbye.